Solve this equation, my salary is yours. Dr. Richard Ashworth's challenge to a 12-year-old would become the most expensive words he ever spoke. The arrogant university professor had strutted into Roosevelt Middle School that Tuesday morning, his face twisting in disgust at the broken desks and peeling paint. 37th graders in worn clothes sat quietly, unaware they were about to witness academic history. So these are the supposed bright minds from the ghetto? Ashworth sneered, pulling out hand sanitizer after touching a desk. I know children from less advantaged backgrounds might find real mathematics intimidating. When tiny Jamal Washington raised his hand asking about quantum physics, the professor exploded into mocking laughter. Oh my God, seriously? Kid, can you even spell algebra? He pointed at Jamal's worn sneakers with disgust. Then came the moment that would destroy his career. Ashworth scrawled a complex differential equation across the chalkboard. This is real mathematics, but let's be realistic about what ghetto kids can actually achieve. Have you ever watched someone seal their fate with pure arrogance? Roosevelt Middle School stood like a monument to neglect in Chicago's South Side. The building's broken windows were covered with cardboard, and the heating system hadn't worked properly in 3 years. Inside classroom 204, water stains decorated the ceiling like abstract art, and textbooks from 1995 lay scattered across desks, held together with duct tape. This was where the university's Youth Math Talent Search program had brought Dr. Richard Ashworth. The mandatory community outreach existed solely to maintain the school's tax-exempt status and federal grants. For Ashworth, it was a box to check, nothing more. The professor made no effort to hide his contempt. Do any of these children even know basic algebra? He asked Principal Martinez loud enough for students to hear. When offered the cafeteria lunch, he wrinkled his nose. I'll eat somewhere cleaner. Ashworth's real mission was simple. Spend 2 hours pretending to care about underprivileged youth, take some photos for the university website, then return to his ivory tower. His annual salary of $180,000 represented 15 years of what Jamal's grandmother earned cleaning office buildings at night. The systematic humiliation began immediately. When Miss Carter showed him student work, Ashworth barely glanced at it. How do you maintain any academic standards here? If there are any. His voice carried the practiced dismissal of someone who believed intelligence correlated directly with zip code and bank account. Jamal Washington sat in the third row, small for his age, but with eyes that burned with curiosity. While other kids doodled or daydreamed, he filled notebook margins with equations he'd taught himself from library books. His worn backpack contained advanced mathematics texts he'd borrowed from the public library, titles that would challenge college freshmen. But adults saw only what they expected: a poor black child from the projects. Store clerks followed him when he bought textbooks with birthday money. Librarians automatically directed him to picture books when he asked for calculus references. Even well-meaning teachers patted his head and said he was smart for his age, while steering him toward more realistic goals. The prejudice ran deeper than academics. When Ashworth discovered Jamal lived with his grandmother in subsidized housing, his assumptions crystallized. Children from these circumstances often develop unrealistic aspirations, he told Principal Martinez, not bothering to lower his voice. Is he getting proper guidance at home? The professor's credentials were legitimate. His Princeton Ph.D. hung in an office lined with published research papers. He'd solved theoretical problems that had stumped mathematicians for decades, but his fatal flaw was believing that genius required privilege, that true intelligence emerged only from proper breeding and expensive education. Your people need to understand their limitations, he'd told a colleague over wine the previous evening. It's actually cruel to give these children false hope about intellectual achievement. The classroom dynamics revealed everything wrong with the system. When Ashworth asked questions, hands shot up from kids desperate to impress the university professor. But their enthusiasm died quickly under his withering responses. Interesting guess, but completely wrong. Perhaps try something more age-appropriate. That's exactly what I expected from this environment. Other students began avoiding eye contact with Jamal, sensing the professor's disdain for their classmates' advanced questions. Some whispered among themselves, maybe Jamal is getting too big for his britches. The professor knows more than us kids. The community reinforcement was swift and brutal. Neighbors who'd heard about the university visit shook their heads. That boy needs to learn his place before disappointment hits. Even the corner store clerk felt emboldened to comment, "Your grandson getting uppity ideas at school?" Miss Carter watched her student's confidence crumble under the systematic assault. She'd seen Jamal solve calculus problems during lunch breaks, watched him explain mathematical concepts with clarity that amazed her. But surrounded by adults determined to crush his spirit, even she began to doubt. The age-based cruelty cut deepest. 12-year-olds should play with toys, not pretend to understand mathematics, Ashworth proclaimed to anyone who'd listen. Children this age lack the cognitive development for abstract thinking. This boy needs a reality check about adult subjects. The racial undertones were subtle but unmistakable. Ashworth spoke about these children and your people with the practiced discrimination of someone who'd never examined his own bias. He referenced cultural differences in intellectual priorities and suggested Jamal focus on more practical skills. By the end of that first hour, a brilliant child had been systematically stripped of confidence by adults who should have nurtured his gift. But what none of them realized was that Jamal Washington possessed something far more dangerous than raw intelligence. He had the quiet determination of someone who'd been underestimated his entire life. How far would they push before discovering their mistake? The moment that would change everything started with Ashworth's sadistic smile. He'd been building toward this crescendo of humiliation for 30 minutes, systematically destroying Jamal's confidence piece by piece. Now came the kill shot. "Since this child thinks he can play with adult mathematics," Ashworth announced, turning to face the class, "let's give him a real test." His voice carried the theatrical cruelty of someone savoring their victim's destruction. He grabbed a marker and began covering the entire whiteboard with symbols, deliberately writing in tiny script near the top. Jamal had to climb onto his chair just to see the equation clearly, his small frame wobbling as classmates snickered. "Look how cute he can barely reach the board," Ashworth mocked, pulling out his phone to film. "This is what happens when children don't understand their limitations." The equation itself was a monster, a complex partial differential involving wave mechanics that would challenge graduate students, but Ashworth wasn't done with his psychological warfare. "Can you even pronounce these mathematical terms correctly?" he demanded, pointing at Greek symbols. "Or are you just pretending to understand grown-up words?" Jamal's voice cracked as he tried to respond. That's a partial derivative of the wave function." "Wrong terminology." Ashworth cut him off with obvious glee. "See, class, this is exactly what I expected. Big words, zero understanding." But the professor was just warming up. He forced Jamal to spell differential out loud, correcting his pronunciation with exaggerated patience. Then came the contract. "I want you to sign something first," Ashworth said, producing an official university letterhead. "When you inevitably fail tomorrow, you'll stand right here and apologize to your classmates for wasting everyone's time with impossible dreams." The document was pure humiliation. Jamal's hands shook as he read, "I, Jamal Washington, acknowledge that I cannot solve this equation. I will publicly apologize for having unrealistic expectations and disrupting the educational process." "Sign it," Ashworth commanded. "Witnesses required." Principal Martinez shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Miss Carter started to object, then fell silent under Ashworth's withering glare. 37th graders watched their classmate being psychologically tortured by an adult who should have protected him. The signing ceremony became a spectacle. Ashworth made each teacher witness the document, announcing over the school's PA system, "Attention Roosevelt Middle School. We have a student attempting to solve graduate-level mathematics. Results will be demonstrated tomorrow in the gymnasium." "Timer starts now," Ashworth declared, checking his Rolex with theatrical precision. 24 hours. Even adults need days for problems like this. But you wanted to play with the big boys." He wasn't finished. "Oh, and child, when you inevitably fail tomorrow." He pointed to a spot directly in front of the whiteboard. "You'll stand right there and tell everyone that dreams are for people who can actually achieve them." The classroom fell silent except for the sound of phones recording. Students were already posting videos with captions like, "Poor kid doesn't know his place," and "Professor about to destroy student." Jamal climbed down from his chair, the signed contract clutched in his trembling hands. His classmates stared with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Some had already started distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with tomorrow's inevitable humiliation. 24 hours, Ashworth repeated, savoring each word. Then we'll see what happens when children try to compete in a man's world. As the bell rang, Ashworth gathered his papers with obvious satisfaction. He'd accomplished his real goal, publicly destroying a child's confidence so thoroughly that no other student would dare challenge adult authority again. But as he walked toward the door, he missed something crucial. Despite the tears threatening to fall, despite the humiliation burning his cheeks, Jamal Washington was already studying the equation. The professor had just made the biggest mistake of his academic career. What happens when you underestimate someone who's been fighting their entire life? That afternoon, Roosevelt Middle School's library felt like a sanctuary. While his classmates headed home or to after-school activities, Jamal sat alone at a corner table, surrounded by borrowed mathematics textbooks that most adults couldn't understand. The equation Ashworth had scrawled across the board stared back at him from his notebook. At first glance, it looked impossible. A complex partial differential equation involving wave mechanics that would normally require years of graduate study to comprehend. But Jamal had been teaching himself advanced mathematics since he was 9 years old. While other kids played video games, he devoured physics papers and mathematical proofs. His worn backpack contained texts on quantum mechanics, differential equations, and theoretical physics that he'd memorized cover to cover. As he traced the symbols with his small finger, something nagged at him. The equation looked familiar, like a variation of the Schrödinger wave equation he'd studied in a borrowed physics textbook. But something was wrong. This coefficient should be negative, he whispered to himself, checking and rechecking his references. Energy dissipates, it doesn't amplify infinitely. His heart started racing as the realization hit him. Professor Ashworth hadn't just given him a difficult problem, he'd made a fundamental error in transcription. The equation as written violated basic conservation of energy principles. It was mathematically impossible to solve because it was mathematically incorrect. Jamal spent the next 3 hours verifying his discovery. He found the original 1926 Schrödinger paper online, comparing it symbol by symbol with Ashworth's version. The error was undeniable. A positive coefficient where there should be a negative one, making the equation describe a system that gained energy from nothing. If this is right, Jamal breathed, then Professor Ashworth doesn't know what he wrote. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Word about the challenge had spread throughout the school, with students gathering in small groups to whisper about Jamal's impending humiliation. Some looked at him with pity, others with the cruel anticipation of watching someone fail spectacularly. Miss Carter pulled him aside before class. "Jamal, you don't have to do this. We can find a way for you to back out gracefully." But Jamal shook his head. "I need to do this, Miss Carter, for all of us." When Professor Ashworth strutted into the classroom, his confidence was absolute. He'd spent the evening telling colleagues about the reality check he was about to deliver to a delusional inner-city child. "Well, well," he announced, checking his expensive watch. "Time's up, little man. Ready to apologize to your classmates?" That's when Jamal raised his small hand. His voice was quiet but steady. "Professor, I believe there's an error in your equation." The classroom erupted in nervous laughter. Ashworth's face flushed red with indignation. "Excuse me? Young man, this equation has been verified by multiple PhD candidates with 8+ years of university education. Perhaps you should focus on understanding what's actually written instead of making excuses." But Jamal was already walking toward the board. He had to stand on his tiptoes to reach the problematic section, his finger pointing to a specific term in the middle of the complex formula. "This coefficient right here," he said, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "In the original Schrödinger paper from 1926, this should be negative. The equation you wrote would create infinite energy from nothing, which violates the first law of thermodynamics." The room fell silent. Miss Carter quickly pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she searched for the original physics paper. Other students craned their necks, confused by the technical language but sensing something significant was happening. Ashworth sputtered, his confidence cracking for the first time. That's ridiculous. I've been teaching mathematics for 30 years. Some child can't possibly—" "Here it is," Miss Carter interrupted, her voice filled with amazement. "The original Schrödinger equation. Jamal is correct. The coefficient is negative in the source paper." The silence that followed was deafening. 37th graders stared at their 12-year-old classmate who had just corrected a university professor. Several students pulled out phones, capturing the moment when their weird classmate proved he wasn't weird at all. He was brilliant. Ashworth's face cycled through emotions: shock, denial, then desperate damage control. Well, even if there's a minor transcription error, the corrected version still requires university-level mathematics that no child could possibly understand. Jamal looked up at the towering professor, his young face serious but not disrespectful. "Would you like me to solve both versions, Professor, the incorrect one you wrote and the correct one from the original paper?" "Both? Both versions?" Ashworth stammered. "Yes, sir, I can show why your version is impossible to solve, because it asks math to lie about physics, and then I can solve the real equation the way Schrödinger intended." The shift in the room was palpable. Students who had been embarrassed for Jamal now sat forward in their seats. Miss Carter barely contained her smile as she watched her student demonstrate knowledge that exceeded anything she'd imagined possible. "You see," Jamal continued, his confidence growing, "math doesn't care how old you are or where you come from. It only cares about being honest. And this equation," he pointed to Ashworth's version, "this equation is telling a lie." For the first time since entering Roosevelt Middle School, Professor Ashworth looked uncertain. The child he'd dismissed as a ghetto dreamer had just exposed a fundamental error in his work, using reasoning that demonstrated understanding far beyond elementary education. But the professor's ego wouldn't let him admit defeat so easily. If anything, this unexpected competence made him more determined to crush the child completely. "Fine," Ashworth said through gritted teeth. "If you think you're so smart, let's make this interesting." What he said next would escalate this from a classroom challenge to a public spectacle that would change both their lives forever. Could a 12-year-old really be this dangerous to a professor's reputation? Within 6 hours, Jamal Washington became the most famous 12-year-old in America for all the wrong reasons. The video started innocently enough. A classmate had filmed the moment Jamal corrected Professor Ashworth, posting it on TikTok with the caption, "Kid thinks he's smarter than a professor, LOL." But the internet had other plans. The clip exploded across social media platforms like wildfire. By lunchtime, it had been viewed 2 million times under the hashtag #ProfessorVisKid. The comments section became a battlefield between those defending Jamal and others, eager to watch a uppity child get destroyed. "Poor baby doesn't know his place yet. That professor is about to end this kid's whole career. Why are we entertaining a 12-year-old's delusions?" This is what happens when kids don't respect adults. But buried among the cruelty were other voices. This kid might actually be brilliant. The professor looks scared. David versus Goliath vibes. National news networks picked up the story within hours. CNN ran a segment titled "Child Genius or Academic Disruption." Fox News countered with, "When children challenge authority, has education gone too far?" Professor Ashworth found himself thrust into an unwanted spotlight. His university demanded answers. His colleagues peppered him with questions. And worst of all, several reporters had fact-checked the original equation, confirming that the 12-year-old was mathematically correct. "This is ridiculous," Ashworth fumed to his department head. "We're allowing a child to embarrass the entire academic establishment. Someone needs to put this boy in his place before he humiliates education itself." That's when the professor made his second catastrophic mistake. Instead of gracefully acknowledging the error and moving on, his wounded ego demanded total victory. He called a press conference. "Since this child believes he can compete with doctoral-level mathematics," Ashworth announced to a room full of reporters, "let's give him a proper stage. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the university's grand auditorium, young Mr. Washington will attempt to solve not just the corrected equation, but 3 additional graduate-level problems I'll personally select." The stakes exploded overnight. What had been a classroom embarrassment became a public spectacle with national implications. The university's 2,000-seat auditorium was reserved. Live streaming arrangements were made. Pay-per-view companies offered $19.99 to watch the child versus professor showdown. Academic heavy hitters flew in from across the country. Dr. Patricia Williams from Harvard announced she'd serve on the verification panel to ensure proper academic standards. Dr. Robert Kim from Stanford declared the event a necessary reality check for America's youth. "We cannot allow children to believe they can challenge decades of expertise," Williams told reporters. "This boy clearly needs psychological evaluation for delusions of intellectual grandeur." The media feeding frenzy intensified. News vans surrounded Jamal's apartment building. Reporters shoved microphones in his face as he walked to school. His grandmother, overwhelmed by the attention, broke down crying on camera. "Please leave my baby alone," she sobbed. "He's just a child." But the machine had already taken over. Online betting pools reached $50,000, with overwhelming odds against Jamal. Anonymous child advocacy groups demanded the challenge be stopped, claiming it would psychologically damage him. Others accused them of enabling unrealistic expectations in underprivileged youth. The community that had once quietly supported Jamal began turning against him. Parents complained that the circus was disrupting education. School board members held emergency meetings. Some neighbors who'd known him since birth suddenly avoided his grandmother at the grocery store. "That boy is bringing shame to our whole community," whispered Mrs. Johnson from apartment 3B, "making us all look bad with his showing off." Even worse, Jamal's classmates started treating him like a pariah. Half avoided him entirely, not wanting to be in the inevitable failure videos. Others approached with fake sympathy. "I hope it doesn't hurt too much when you lose." The cruel ones were more direct. "You're gonna cry on national TV." Professor Ashworth launched a media tour, appearing on every network that would have him. "I'm trying to save this child from lifetime disappointment," he told CNN. "Someone needs to teach these kids realistic expectations before they destroy themselves with impossible dreams." The psychological warfare reached new heights. Anonymous letters appeared at Jamal's apartment. "Stupid kids should know their place." Fake academic experts appeared on news shows questioning the boy's mental health. Online trolls created memes mocking his appearance and poverty. University gift shops began selling merchandise. I witnessed the reality check t-shirts and Know Your Limits coffee mugs. Bookmakers offered 1,001 odds against the 12-year-old. Academic podcasts devoted entire episodes to the danger of participation trophy culture. Dr. Ashworth's confidence reached new peaks during his final pre-event interview. "I almost feel bad about what's going to happen to this child tomorrow," he said with theatrical sympathy. "But sometimes reality requires harsh lessons." As Tuesday evening arrived, Jamal sat alone in his bedroom, surrounded by advanced mathematics textbooks and the crushing weight of a nation's expectations. Tomorrow, he would either prove that genius has no age limit or be destroyed by the most public humiliation a child had ever endured. The entire academic establishment was banking on his destruction. Could one small boy really survive what they had planned for him? The countdown to destruction began with 48 hours on the clock. Hour 1, 8. The studying begins. While America debated his fate on social media, Jamal Washington sat in the public library until closing time. The ancient building's fluorescent lights flickered over his corner table, where advanced physics textbooks formed protective walls around his small frame. "Kid, we're closing," the security guard said gently. He'd been watching the 12-year-old for hours, this child who'd somehow become national news. "Are you okay getting home?" Jamal looked up with exhausted eyes. "I'm trying to save my family's reputation, sir. Just 5 more minutes." The guard let him stay an extra hour, watching this tiny boy work through mathematical proofs that would challenge college professors. When Jamal finally packed his superhero backpack, he'd discovered an elegant solution pathway using visual thinking techniques he'd taught himself. Hour 9, 16. The home front crumbles. Sleep was impossible. News vans lined their street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical vultures. Reporters knocked on neighbors' doors, offering money for embarrassing stories about the delusional child. Jamal's grandmother sat at their kitchen table, hands shaking as she opened another threatening letter. "Baby, maybe we should just say you're sick," she whispered. "Tell them you can't do it." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was hearing Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs telling a reporter, "That boy always thought he was better than everyone else. His grandmother filled his head with nonsense about being special." Even their corner store clerk, Mr. Kim, who'd known Jamal since he was 5, avoided eye contact when they bought groceries. The community that had raised him was abandoning him when he needed them most. Hour 17, 24. School becomes a war zone. Wednesday morning at Roosevelt Middle School felt like walking through enemy territory. Half of Jamal's classmates pretended he didn't exist. The other half watched him with the fascination reserved for car accidents. "My dad says you're going to embarrass all black kids," whispered Marcus during math class. "Says you're making us look stupid by trying to be something we're not." During lunch, Jamal sat alone while kids filmed him eating, creating TikToks with captions like "last meal before execution" and "rep this kid's confidence." Even worse, some teachers whispered among themselves, questioning whether they should have intervened earlier. "Maybe we enabled this," Miss Carter overheard in the faculty lounge. "Told him he was smarter than he really is." But there was one bright spot. Carter secretly provided advanced textbooks during lunch, helping him understand graduate-level notation systems. "You're not crazy, Jamal," she said quietly. "What you did yesterday was remarkable." Hour 25, 32, the media circus intensifies Wednesday afternoon brought more horror. A reporter cornered Jamal outside school, shoving a microphone in his face. "How does it feel knowing the entire academic world is laughing at you?" The psychological warfare was systematic and cruel. Fake child development experts appeared on news shows, diagnosing him with everything from autism to narcissistic personality disorder. Online trolls had created a countdown website. Hours until reality hits delusional child. Anonymous calls flooded the school's phone lines. Some threatened the safety of that uppity kid and his family. Others demanded he be expelled for disrupting education with his attention-seeking behavior. The worst came during dinner. His grandmother was watching the news when a Harvard professor appeared on screen. "This child clearly suffers from grandiose delusions common in underprivileged youth who lack proper guidance. Tomorrow's event will either cure him or permanently damage his psychological development." Jamal watched his grandmother's face crumble. She'd spent years sacrificing everything to give him opportunities, and now the world was telling her she'd failed him. Hour 33, 40, the betting pools. Wednesday night revealed the true scope of the spectacle. Online betting had reached $100,000, with professional gamblers offering $2,000. One odds against Jamal. The payouts were so extreme that some people were borrowing money to bet against a 12-year-old. Worse, merchandise had appeared overnight. Street vendors outside Roosevelt Middle School sold Team Professor t-shirts alongside cruel knockoffs featuring Jamal's school photo with the caption "Unrealistic Dreams." The boy who'd once found joy in solving mathematical puzzles now struggled to concentrate as social media notifications exploded with hate. Every platform carried live stream previews with experts explaining why tomorrow would be educational for America's youth about knowing their limitations. Hour 41, 48, the breaking point. Thursday morning arrived with devastating news. Principal Martinez pulled Jamal aside before the first period, his face grim. "Son, the school board met last night. They're concerned about the negative attention. Some members think you should withdraw for everyone's sake." The betrayal was complete. The educational system that should have protected and nurtured his gift was now pressuring him to surrender rather than defend him against adult bullies. During breakfast, his grandmother found him staring at his untouched cereal, tears threatening to fall. "Maybe they're right about me, Grandma. Maybe I am just a stupid kid pretending to be smart." For the first time since this nightmare began, Jamal Washington considered giving up. The weight of a nation's mockery, his community's abandonment, and the academic establishment's coordinated attack had pushed him to his breaking point. But then, something remarkable happened. As he walked through Roosevelt's hallways for what might be the last time as a normal student, he overheard two sixth graders talking by their lockers. "My little sister asked me if she could be a mathematician when she grows up," one said quietly. "I told her only if she's really, really smart like Jamal." "Yeah," the other replied. "My mom said if Jamal can correct a professor, maybe we're all smarter than adults think." In that moment, Jamal realized this was bigger than his personal humiliation. Thousands of children across the country were watching, wondering if age and background really limited what they could achieve. His failure wouldn't just destroy him. It would convince an entire generation of young minds that they should never dare to dream beyond their circumstances. As he walked toward his final class before the showdown, Jamal Washington made a decision that would either save his future or destroy it completely. He wouldn't just solve Professor Ashworth's equations. He would prove that genius belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. But first, He had to survive the most public intellectual execution in academic history. Could a 12-year-old really handle what they had planned for him? 2 hours before the showdown, Miss Carter burst into the principal's office with evidence that would shatter everything. "They changed the equations," she announced, breathless from running across campus. Her laptop screen displayed side-by-side comparisons that made Principal Martinez's face drain of color. The original equation Professor Ashworth had written yesterday was challenging but solvable with exceptional talent. The version now prepared for today's demonstration was something entirely different, a graduate-level number theory problem that had stumped PhD mathematicians for decades. "This isn't just unethical," Miss Carter said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is academic fraud designed to destroy a child." The evidence was damning. University IT logs showed the equations had been modified at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, long after Jamal had begun his preparation. The academic panel had secretly replaced solvable problems with impossibly complex theorems that required specialized research knowledge no 12-year-old could possess. Principal Martinez stared at the screen in disbelief. "They're setting him up for complete humiliation. This isn't education. It's child abuse disguised as academic rigor." But confronting tenured professors from prestigious universities meant career suicide. The university controlled funding for Roosevelt's gifted programs. Crossing them could destroy opportunities for every student in the district. Miss Carter faced an impossible choice: protect one brilliant child or safeguard her own future and every other student she might help. The system was rigged to silence anyone who dared challenge academic authority. Meanwhile, in the library's back corner, Jamal was discovering the deception himself. As he reviewed his final preparations, the complexity of certain sections had grown far beyond his reference materials. The equations now required proof techniques that existed only in specialized graduate research. The 12-year-old's heart sank as the truth became clear. The adults hadn't just lied to him. They'd betrayed the fundamental principle that mathematics should be honest. His innocent trust in academic integrity lay shattered around him like broken glass. "They changed it because I was right the first time," he whispered to himself. "They're so afraid of being wrong that they'll cheat against a kid." But instead of despair, something else began burning in Jamal's chest. If grown-ups wanted to abandon honesty and fairness to protect their egos, he'd show them what real mathematical thinking looked like. He wouldn't solve their rigged equations. He would expose their fraud. Instead of memorizing approaches to problems designed to be unsolvable, Jamal prepared to demonstrate something far more sophisticated: how to recognize when mathematics was being used to lie. The academic establishment thought they'd perfected the trap. They had no idea they'd just handed a 12-year-old genius the weapon he needed to destroy them all. The question wasn't whether Jamal could solve impossible equations. The question was whether academia could survive what he was about to reveal about their character. What happens when adults abandon integrity to defeat a child? The grand auditorium at Whitmore University felt like the Roman Colosseum. 2,000 people packed the seats like spectators waiting for gladiatorial combat, their phones raised to capture a child's destruction for social media posterity. Jamal Washington walked onto the stage looking impossibly small. The massive auditorium swallowed his 12-year-old frame, making him appear fragile under the harsh television lights. Camera crews from major networks positioned themselves for the perfect angle of his inevitable breakdown. The academic panel sat elevated like judges, their credentials displayed on banners behind them. Dr. Patricia Williams from Harvard, Dr. Robert Kim from Stanford, Dr. Margaret Carter from Princeton, 150 years of combined expertise, united in their mission to teach one poor child about intellectual reality. Professor Ashworth stood at a podium like a master of ceremonies, his confidence absolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical grandeur, "today we witness what happens when children attempt to compete in an adult world." The whiteboard stretched across the entire back wall, already filled with equations that looked like hieroglyphics to most viewers. Pay-per-view cameras captured every angle as Jamal approached, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. For the first 10 minutes, magic happened. Jamal's young voice carried surprising authority as he began working through the problems methodically. His natural teaching ability shone as he explained each step in language his 7th-grade classmates could understand. This part represents wave function collapse, he said, his marker tracing symbols with confident strokes. It's like asking math to describe how energy moves through space. The audience murmured with growing amazement. Social media comments shifted from mockery to surprise. Even some panel members leaned forward, recognizing sophistication that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Then he hit the trap. The modified section required number theory techniques that existed only in specialized graduate research. Jamal's marker slowed, then stopped. Confusion clouded his young face as he realized the mathematics had changed into something impossibly complex. The silence stretched like a tightening noose. 2,000 people held their breath, watching a child's confidence crumble in real time. Cameras zoomed in on his trembling hand, his widening eyes, the first hint of tears threatening to fall. Dr. Williams struck like a predator, sensing weakness. "Perhaps the young man has reached the intellectual ceiling we predicted?" Her voice carried practiced condescension. "This is what happens when we give false hope to underprivileged children." Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. Not cruel laughter, worse, pitying laughter. The sound of adults who'd known this outcome was inevitable, who'd gathered to watch a child learn his place in the world. Jamal's hand shook so badly he dropped the marker. It clattered against the floor like a gunshot in the silent auditorium. Social media exploded with hashtags. #realitycheck, #poorkid, #knowyourplace. "This is painful to watch," whispered a reporter into her microphone. "The child is clearly overwhelmed by mathematical concepts far beyond his developmental capacity." In the audience, his grandmother wept silently. Her baby, her brilliant grandson who'd filled their apartment with mathematical wonder, was being psychologically destroyed by adults who should have protected him. Professor Ashworth began standing prematurely, preparing his victory speech about age-appropriate challenges and realistic expectations. The academic panel exchanged satisfied nods. Security moved forward, ready to escort the defeated child away from his public humiliation. Jamal set down his second marker and stepped back from the board. His small shoulders sagged under the weight of national disappointment. 2,000 people watched a 12-year-old spirit being crushed live on television. "Maybe they were right about me," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the microphone. "Maybe I'm just a stupid kid who doesn't know his place." The moment felt final, complete. The academic establishment had successfully taught America's children about intellectual boundaries and social reality. The natural order had been restored. But then, cutting through the suffocating silence, came a voice that changed everything. "Jamal!" Miss Carter called from the audience, her words carrying across the vast space. "Remember what you told me about math being like truth? What if the truth is that these problems are lying?" The 12-year-old's head snapped up, and for the first time in 20 minutes, clarity returned to his eyes. What happens when a child realizes adults have abandoned honesty? Jamal Washington turned from the whiteboard to face 2,000 people, his young voice suddenly clear and steady. "These equations cannot be solved, and I'm going to prove why." The murmur that swept through the grand auditorium was electric. Dr. Ashworth's confident smile faltered for the first time. The academic panel leaned forward, suddenly uncertain about their carefully orchestrated execution. "You see," Jamal continued, his 12-year-old voice carrying with surprising authority, "real mathematics has to tell the truth. But some of these problems are asking math to lie." He approached the first modified equation, pointing to a specific section with his small finger. "This part right here says that energy can be both positive and negative at the exact same time. That's like saying something is both up and down. It's impossible." The crowd's energy shifted palpably. What had been anticipation of a child's destruction was becoming something else entirely. The cameras capturing his breakdown now recorded something unprecedented, a 12-year-old teaching advanced mathematics to university professors. "Dr. Ashworth," Jamal said, turning to face his tormentor directly, "when you changed these equations last night, you made them describe things that can't exist in real physics. It's like writing a math problem that asks, what color is the number 7? The question itself doesn't make sense." Professor Ashworth's face cycled through shock, denial, and growing panic. That's ridiculous. These equations have been verified by doctoral candidates with advanced degrees." Jamal's response was devastating in its simplicity. "Then maybe they need to learn math better than a 7th grader." The auditorium erupted. Gasps echoed off the marble walls. Students filming on phones captured the exact moment when academic hierarchy flipped upside down. The academic panel exchanged panicked glances as their carefully planned humiliation backfired spectacularly. But Jamal wasn't finished. With methodical precision, he began dismantling each rigged equation, explaining in terms so clear that even the confused seventh graders in the audience began understanding graduate-level mathematics. This coefficient here violates conservation of energy, he explained, using a playground analogy. It's like saying you can create a basketball out of thin air. Physics doesn't work that way. Dr. Patricia Williams stood up, her Harvard credentials suddenly feeling worthless. Young man, where did a seventh grader learn proof techniques of this sophistication? Jamal's innocent response cut deeper than any academic insult. I read math books for fun, ma'am. Numbers don't care how old you are. They just want to be understood correctly. The systematic destruction of academic authority continued as Jamal proved one by one that the impossible equations were actually impossible, not because they were too advanced, but because they were mathematically dishonest. The original equation Professor Ashworth wrote yesterday was beautiful, Jamal explained to the captivated audience. It described how waves move through space, something scientists have studied for almost 100 years, but these new versions, he gestured toward the modified problems. These are just mathematical gibberish designed to look smart. Dr. Robert Kim from Stanford interrupted desperately. This is preposterous. We cannot allow a child to undermine decades of academic expertise. Jamal turned to him with the moral clarity that only children possess. I'm not trying to be mean to grown-ups, sir. I just want math to be honest. If you use equations that lie, that's not real mathematics anymore. The moment of complete reversal came when Jamal approached the whiteboard one final time. In clear, confident strokes, he rewrote each equation in its correct form, then solved all three in rapid succession. His explanations were so elegant that university professors found themselves taking notes. His methods were so innovative that graduate students pulled out phones to record his techniques. Most remarkably, his teaching was so clear that children in the audience began understanding concepts that had previously seemed impossible. Math should be like telling the truth, Jamal said as he completed the final solution. When adults use it to trick kids, they're not doing mathematics anymore. They're just being bullies with fancy degrees. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building's foundation, but the real power came from the children in the audience. Hundreds of young faces suddenly believing that age didn't limit what they could achieve. Professor Ashworth made one last desperate attempt at damage control. This was simply an educational exercise to demonstrate realistic expectations. Jamal's response was the kill shot that ended his career. Professor Ashworth, you showed that having expensive degrees doesn't mean you understand math better than someone who really studies it. And you showed that some adults will cheat against kids when they're scared of being wrong. The academic panel's meltdown was swift and public. Dr. Williams confirmed that Jamal's proofs were mathematically sound. Dr. Kim scrambled to distance himself from the fraud. Other professors who'd flown in to witness a child's destruction now faced questions about their own competence. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Jamal addressed the audience directly. I want every kid watching this to know something important. Adults don't always know better just because they're older. Sometimes you have to trust your own mind, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. The social media explosion was instantaneous. #Justice for Jamal replaced #RealityCheck as videos of his triumph spread across every platform. The betting pools that had offered $2,000. One odds against him now faced massive payouts to the few brave souls who'd believed in a 12-year-old genius. University administrators rushed toward the stage, desperate to control the narrative disaster. Media representatives shouted questions about academic integrity. The pay-per-view audience that had paid to watch a child's humiliation instead witnessed the complete destruction of educational arrogance. As the chaos swirled around him, Jamal Washington stood quietly at the center, still holding his marker. He'd done more than solve impossible equations. He'd proven that truth and intelligence belonged to anyone brave enough to claim them, regardless of age, background, or the approval of adults. The 12-year-old who'd entered the auditorium as a victim had emerged as something far more dangerous to the establishment, a symbol of authentic genius that couldn't be controlled, contained, or destroyed by institutional authority. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. What happens when a child's victory exposes corruption that reaches far beyond one arrogant professor? The investigation that followed Jamal's triumph uncovered a conspiracy that shocked the academic world. Within hours of the public humiliation, University IT Forensics revealed the full scope of the deception. The equation modifications weren't just unethical. They were part of a coordinated effort by multiple professors to ensure the uppity child was destroyed as publicly as possible. Email chains emerged showing Professor Ashworth coordinating with colleagues at Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. "We cannot allow this precedent," read one message from Dr. Williams. "If one inner-city child succeeds, others will follow. The entire hierarchy of academic credibility is at stake." The conspiracy included media manipulation, with professors secretly feeding talking points to news networks about realistic expectations for underprivileged youth. They'd even coordinated the betting pools, ensuring maximum public investment in Jamal's failure. When University President Dr. Margaret Foster announced the investigation results, Professor Ashworth made one final desperate attempt to escape responsibility. "This was just an educational exercise," he claimed to assembled reporters. "You can't hold grown professionals accountable for informal challenges made to attention-seeking children." But the evidence was overwhelming. Legal experts confirmed that verbal contracts applied regardless of age, especially when witnessed by hundreds and broadcast internationally. More damaging were the documented threats against a minor and the systematic psychological warfare designed to break a child's spirit. Child protection advocates mobilized immediately. "This represents educational malpractice of the highest order," announced attorney Sarah Richardson. "Adults who would conspire to psychologically destroy a 12-year-old have no business in education." The university faced an impossible choice: pay the promised $180,000 and admit institutional child abuse, or refuse payment and face criminal investigations, plus a public relations apocalypse that would destroy their reputation permanently. The decision was swift and brutal. Professor Ashworth was terminated immediately, his tenure revoked, and his pension forfeited. The other conspirators faced similar fates as their institutions scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. But Jamal Washington, with the grace that had defined him throughout the ordeal, made a statement that completed his moral victory. "I'm not angry at Professor Ashworth anymore. Maybe now he'll understand that being wrong doesn't make you stupid, but being mean to kids who are right definitely makes you wrong." The ripple effects were immediate. Universities nationwide implemented policies protecting gifted children from academic intimidation. The Jamal Washington Protection Act was introduced in Congress, criminalizing systematic psychological abuse of minors in educational settings. Most importantly, applications from underprivileged children to university mathematics programs increased by 400% as young minds across America realized that genius belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. Could one 12-year-old's courage really change an entire system? 1 year later, Jamal Washington returned to Roosevelt Middle School as the most famous 8th grader in America. The same classroom where Professor Ashworth had once humiliated him now housed the Jamal Washington Center for Young Mathematical Minds. The cracked walls had been repaired, new equipment installed, and advanced textbooks filled shelves that had once held outdated materials from the 1990s. Jamal still sat with his peers during regular classes, still carried his superhero backpack, and still explained complex concepts using playground analogies that made other kids laugh. But 3 evenings a week, he took graduate-level mathematics courses online, solving problems that challenged PhD students worldwide. The $180,000 from Professor Ashworth's salary had transformed his family's life. His grandmother moved from their cramped apartment to a house with a yard, her medical bills finally paid. But more importantly, the money funded scholarships for other gifted children from underprivileged backgrounds. "The coolest thing about math," Jamal told the packed auditorium of elementary students who'd come to hear him speak, "is that it doesn't care if you're young or old, rich or poor. Math just wants someone who'll listen to what it's trying to say." The legacy of his triumph extended far beyond personal success. The Washington Paradox, the name given to Ashworth's fraudulent equations, became required study in educational psychology programs. Universities worldwide revised their policies on recognizing and nurturing child genius. Most remarkably, Jamal's victory sparked a movement. children across America began pursuing advanced subjects without shame, inspired by proof that age didn't limit potential. Mathematics competitions saw record participation from young students who no longer accepted adults' assumptions about their capabilities. Miss Carter, now district coordinator for gifted education, watched her former student with immense pride. The boy who'd once sat alone in the library teaching himself calculus from borrowed books had become a symbol of intellectual courage for an entire generation. Every day, brilliant young minds are dismissed because adults think children can't handle grown-up ideas. Jamal's voice carried across the auditorium. In your family, your school, your community, which child are you underestimating? His final message resonated with viewers worldwide. Share this story if you believe in the power of young minds. Subscribe for more stories of kids who refuse to be limited by what adults thought they could do. And remember, the next genius you meet might still be learning their multiplication tables. The 12-year-old who'd once been told to know his place had taught the world that genius belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. What extraordinary mind will you discover today?
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.